Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Leanna. I will be presenting my honors capstone project, Buddhism, Meditation, and the Negotiation of the Public Sphere. This research was done by the guidance of Dr. Matthew King. And when I was first trying to figure out what project to do for this capstone, I was surprised to find that there has been no official research conducted on Buddhist communities throughout the Inland Empire. So as soon as I found this out, I knew exactly what I wanted to do. So for this presentation, I will first start off by explaining why this research. Second, I will just give a brief literature review of how Buddhism has been represented in scholarship, as well as some of its development in America. Third, I will briefly go over the sites and participants in the study. Fourth, I will talk about the research questions, as well as the expectations that I had at the beginning. And fifth, I will talk about the methods involved. And lastly, I will go over the results. So why this research? Well, for me personally, I actually grew up with a Christian background. And so for me, religion was always very important. And ever since I was younger, I've also been interested in other people's religious beliefs and how it affected their worldview and their behavior. It was also when I started taking courses in community college related to religious studies that I knew that I wanted to do this for a profession. And I also wanted to undertake this research because I wanted to better understand IRB protocol and have some experience with ethnography as well. And why does this research matter? Well, as I previously mentioned, the research, there hasn't been anything done on this specific population, and I wanted to show how Buddhists have been impacted by their surrounding environment, and I want to provide data for future scholars and students that they can use for their own work in the future. Next, literature review. Instead of being discovered, Buddhism was actually created. It was created by the colonial British who visited Asian countries. And they saw Buddhism, as well as its people, existing as out there, as an imaginative other, as pretty solely foreign, separate from them. And Buddhism ended up being a concept that was made more manageable by Westerners who encountered it. And something I found interesting was the specific quote that says, "The more a colonial administration knew about the people and land it governed, presumably the more effective it could be in governing and using them." So it became a categorizable object, something that could be labeled and better understood. And it was also defined by its textual past, meaning it was heavily defined by Buddhist scriptures, Buddhist literature written by monastics. It was more known as its past, more so than the actual lived experience of Buddhists themselves. And there were a couple of views that came out about Buddhism in past scholarship. One of them was a romanticized version, and this was often formulated by those who were interested in Buddhism, but they used creativity to fill in the gaps for parts that they didn't really understand about Buddhism. And a very well-known piece of literature that's done this is The Light of Asia by Edwin Arnold. And while there's romanticized versions, there was also the negative, the belittled, the minimized. It was by those people who feared the spread of atheism, especially within Western countries. And they often pictured Buddhism as pessimistic, nihilistic, and just pure paganism. Now, fast forwarding to Buddhism in the United States, these Buddhist populations have been affected by many immigration policies in the US, and this includes the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, as well as the Immigration Act of 1924, which made it much harder for them to immigrate to the United States. And it wasn't until the World's Parliament of Religion in 1893 that Buddhism was finally presented as a modern as well as a legitimate practice. And it also encouraged interreligious discourse that was not seen before in the United States. Moving on to the Buddhist sites of this study, as you can see, there were a lot that were included, including the Shilai Temple, Metaphors Monastery, Van Thu Temple, among many others. And there were various participants who were all in various positions of leadership, including abbots, abbesses, secretaries, regional leaders, as well as a disciple and a resident teacher, all totaling to 14 participants. Now, for my original plan was to meet these sites and participants in person and to observe these classes and services that they offered. But then COVID-19 pandemic happened, and then I had to do everything over Zoom, over the phone. Luckily, I was still able to do transcriptions, and information from those transcriptions will be posted on an ArcGIS story maps for future scholars very soon. And luckily, I was still able to meet the goals of this research. And in this research, it included ethnographic interviews. Everyone was offered the option of having their identities remain confidential, and a few did opt for that option. However, all the Buddhist sites appear as they do in real life, meaning I did not change any of the names of the Buddhist temples and centers involved, and I provided everyone with the portions of the paper pertaining to their own interviews. And I also obtained all necessary permissions to go forward with the research. And I had a lot of challenges, especially with communication. Since I couldn't meet anyone in person, I had to do everything by phone call, emails. I even sent out physical letters introducing my research topic. However, there was unequal access in technology. And unfortunately, there were a lot of temples and centers that just didn't respond. And the amount of the time for research process practically doubled in terms of responses of initial outreach, receiving access letters, obtaining signed informed consent documents, as well as scheduling interviews, all took a lot of time and juggling. And one of the biggest challenges that I did not anticipate was how hard it was to transcribe 14 interviews that were all about 1 hour in length. And the research question that I had mainly was to look at the intersections of religion, economy, and the social, but primarily to see what these stories illuminate about life in the Inland Empire for these Buddhist communities. And for this study, I had so many expectations, but for the sake of time, I just included 3 of them that I found the most interesting. I expected that none of the temples would have large convert communities, meaning those who weren't initially born into Buddhism, and I didn't think that any of them had challenges related to their Buddhist identity, and I didn't think there would be many positives to going virtual during COVID-19 for these centers. So for the results with converts, I was very surprised. There were at least 3 temples that had a lot of converts. For example, the Shilai Temple, they have a very large Chinese American Buddhist community. And at first I thought they were all born into Buddhism, even before the construction of Shilai Temple, but that wasn't true. Many of them converted after the temple was built, and it was after it was constructed that they took on the Buddhist identity. And many of them were also introduced to Buddhism, often during funeral rituals that were provided by the Shilai Temple. And the second center was SGI USA Riverside Buddhist Center, who it was interesting because um, the SGI group, they originally started in Japan. However, a majority of the members in the United States are not Japanese. And that is also the case especially the case for the Riverside group. And for Metaphorist Monastery, they have a Thai community there who I thought were already Buddhist before the construction of the monastery, but that's not true either. The abbot explained to me that a majority of the Thai community was already westernized before immigration and did not really take on their Buddhist identity until they got to America and felt that something was missing for them. So it kind of helped to give them that feeling of cohesion within their own group as well as something to cling to. And the results for the challenges they experienced. It turns out that the Middleland Chan Monastery faced religious discrimination, and they were actually denied by the city of Walnut to build their monastery there, even after they met all of the requirements to build there. So it ended up resulting in a lawsuit against the city, and it wasn't to get revenge on the city. It was just so that other religious groups would not have to deal with this discrimination in the future. And also the Huangsen Buddhist Temple, they faced challenges in growing their membership as well as spreading their influence in the surrounding city. And the venerable there told me that the American lifestyle that many of the temple members took on has made it more difficult for them to be involved in their temple community because they have a lot less time due to their jobs, their family obligations. So they're not as active in the temple as they would maybe in their home country for most of them. And lastly, for the Metaphorist Monastery, for the abbot, it was cultural immersion because the abbot himself grew up in the USA until he was about 20 years old, but then he moved to Thailand and he eventually became ordained there and he lived there for 20 more years. And then he came back to the US, and it was a type of culture shock for him because he had to then adjust back to the American environment as an adult. And lastly, the effects of COVID-19. I didn't think there was going to be many positives to this, but I was very wrong. For the Dharmachakra Kadampa Buddhist Center located in Palm Springs, they hold international festivals, and the past year it went online. And a large population of their center is of retirement age. So when they're older, it becomes a lot more stressful and a lot more difficult for them to travel. So with it all going online, they were able to participate in a lot more a lot more of their festivals. And the Dharma Drum Mountain Los Angeles Center, traffic is a huge problem. And with everything going online, their activities, there was a lot less stress to get to the center on time. And it was also safer for the elderly because a lot of their activities were at night. And it's much safer for them to not drive at night. And they were also able to view major holidays back in their home country. And one of the venerables told me that it makes her feel a lot less far away from them. And lastly, for the Sakyametta Buddhist Vihara, the venerable there explained to me that it's really become a time to deepen their practice as Buddhists, and it's really made them lean more into their teachings. It's really challenged them and made them a lot more involved in their own beliefs. So for my conclusion, many of the results were very different from my expectations. And I'm hoping that this research hopes to create a truthful narrative of these communities, and it will give anthropology and religious studies scholars data to work with. And hopefully people will build onto this research in the future as well. And I would really love to thank my faculty mentor, Dr. Matthew King, for guiding me through the IRB process and through the research process itself. I would also like to thank the honors program for giving me this great opportunity to have hands-on experience. I would also like to thank CHAS, as well as the UCR Interim Provost and Executive Vice Chancellor, Dr. Thomas Smith, for helping to fund this project and to help give me the resources I needed. Thank you to all the participants involved in this study. Without them, this study wouldn't have been possible, and for their time. And thank you to all the friends and family who have given me the very needed moral support when I needed it. Thank you so much.
That's great, Leanna. Thank you a lot. Can you take down your share screen now so we can all see each other? I find it